Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. This time out, a remote controllable USB audio interface from PreSonus. Let's get started. Today we're checking out the Studio 192 Mobile from PreSonus. This is a USB 3 audio interface that will also connect to Mac and PC using USB 2.0. You can remote control it using Studio One software, and it also comes with a free downloadable app that allows you to remote control it from your computer, or you can control it from an iPad as well. The Studio 192 Mobile is a 26 by 32 audio interface, 26 inputs, it has 2 mic preamps, and has 32 outputs. Let's take a quick tour of the front and back panels. Beginning up front, we have our 2 microphone preamp inputs, and those will also accept instrument level signals. In the center, we have our controls for those preamps. By selecting the left or right arrows, we can move between the 2 preamps. The knob controls the gain of the preamp. We can turn 48 volt phantom power on and off for each preamp. And the last one is a Q switch for headphone mixes. Next up, we have 4 LED meters to display input levels, as well as 2 LED meters to display main output levels. The large knob controls the main output, which typically you'd route to your monitors. Then we also have a headphone output with its own dedicated level control. On the back panel, we have all the remaining connections. Beginning on the far left, we have the power supply connection, and then the USB 3.0 connection, and again, that is also compatible with USB 2.0. Next up, we have 2 banks of ADAT optical input and output. Each of those supports 8 channels of input and output, or at high sample rate supports 4 channels. These 2 RCA jacks support stereo SpeedIF input and output. And then we have word clock in and out for synchronizing to external digital gear. The main left and right outputs would typically be connected to your monitors. And then we have 4 line outputs that you could route to external gear, to headphone amps, to processors, wherever you want to send those. And finally, we have 2 line outputs. To take complete control over all the functions of the Studio 192 Mobile, as well as routing latency-free mixes, you use the UC Surface app. Now, this is compatible with Mac and PC, and not only gives you control over all the mixes, but also provides fat channel processing and all the analog inputs and outputs, built-in reverb, built-in delay, and all of those run on DSP inside the interface, so there's no latency hit. When you launch UC Surface, you'll see this small window that contains all of our setup functions. So we can set our sample rate up to 192K, we can set our clock source, we can also set the block size, and block size is basically a latency setting. It's basically a buffer setting for the audio interface. The input format and the output format fields show us how many inputs and outputs are available. Now if we change this to a higher sample rate, say to 192, it'll drop down to indicate that we have 4 channels of input available and 8 channels of output available. Let's go back to 44.1K. If we click on the icon for the interface, it'll open up our internal mixer. And here we can access all the controls for the preamp. So we can turn 48 volt on and off. We can reverse the polarity from inside the app, which we can't do from the front panel. We can also control the preamp level. We can link the 2 inputs together for stereo recording, and we can access both the left and the right channels independently if we want. On the bottom 2/3 of the screen down here is where we can see all of our different mixes displayed. Now we have a number of different mixes available, and those can be routed to the outputs independently, so you can have separate headphone mixes, separate Q mixes, routings to go to different processors, as well as the main outputs, which carry the mix that'll go to your monitors. Here in the app, we can look at the individual mixes for those different outputs. So here's our main mix. We can switch to mix 1 and 2, which will be going out of line outputs 1 and 2. We can go back to our main mix. We can go to ADAT 1 and 2 outputs and set up a separate mix for that. So all of those can be set up and you can quickly switch between them. One of the great things about the Studio 192 Mobile is with that DSP processing built right into the interface, we have what PreSonus calls fat channel processing. And basically this is input processing that can be applied to all of the analog inputs. We can see that here in the top part of the screen. We can look at our dynamics. So we have a gate as well as a compressor for each channel. We also have a parametric EQ for each channel. And we can save and load presets. This fat channel processing that runs right on the DSP inside the interface corresponds to the fat channel processing from the plugin that runs in the Studio One DAW. So if you're using Studio One, those settings will directly correspond. And in fact, you can use that DSP processing with all your settings during tracking, and then during mixing, you can transfer those settings into the plugin running inside the DAW and get the exact same sound. In addition to that input channel processing, we also have 2 effects processors on board the Studio 192 Mobile. Effects A is dedicated to reverb, and we can have a separate mix for that, for each channel. We can also edit the reverb settings. We have 50 different presets, and we can also save user presets. A number of different reverb types are available: ambient, small room, small hall, and we have access to basic parameters for each of the reverb types. Our second effects processor, effects B, is dedicated to delay effects. Once again, we can edit that. We have mono delay, filter delay, stereo delay, and ping pong delay. And again, we have control over the basic parameters for each of those delay types. We also have tap tempo available for each of the delay types. You can set the line level outputs on the Studio 192 mobile up to be separate monitor feeds, so we can actually switch among 3 different sets of monitors. To access that setting, we go up here to the Settings menu. We can open that up, and here's our speaker management. When that's off, basically we have 1 set of speakers. When that's turned on, we have 3 different types of speaker management available to us. In ABC, we can switch among 3 different sets of monitors. When we have speaker management set up to A or B plus C, we can add a subwoofer to the mix. Now when we change A, B, we can go between those two, and we can turn C on so that the subwoofer stays on no matter what set of monitors we're working with. Our third speaker management setting is A plus B plus C, and typically you'd use this for surround monitoring. All 3 sets of speakers can be on simultaneously. From this screen, we can also set up other monitor control parameters. For example, we can monitor the speaker outs, we can dim the monitors, we can also set what output is feeding into the speed of digital outputs, and we can set up our headphone sources. We can set any mix to feed the headphones. In our system settings, we can also set our talkback source, so we can assign either microphone input 1 or 2 to be our talkback, and we can set whether the meters hold peaks or not. We can also bypass the mixer if we're using Studio One to do our settings. To control talkback and to mute the effects, we open up the Settings menu, which is here on the right side. When we click the talkback button, we'll engage the talkback, and we can assign where that's being routed. So talkback assign allows us to send it to any of the mixes. We can also open up scenes and mutes here. So we have 8 different mute groups available, and we have 8 quick recall mix scenes. Beyond that, we also have other scenes that are available, and we can save our own scenes. A scene includes all the settings inside the Studio 192 mobile, so you can set one up for tracking, one for mixing, one for working with virtual instruments. However you like to work, you can quickly recall a scene and get right to it. Going back to our main screen, here on the Settings menu, we can disengage the mutes, but we can also mute effects A, we can mute effects B, and we can also do tap tempo for the delays in effects B. So no matter what DAW you're using on your Mac or your PC, you can access all of the parameters and set up all those latency-free mixes. This is a very versatile app that's really easy to get around on. It gives you a lot of capability with that built-in DSP processing. But if you're using PreSonus Studio One, you can remote control many of those features right from inside the DAW. Let's open that up and check it out. So I've created a session here in Studio One that has 2 inputs. Each of those is accessing one of the microphone inputs. So I've got input left, which is microphone 1, and input right, which is microphone 2. Their channels are down here in the Studio One mixer. A couple of things to notice here. First of all, there's this Z that shows up in our Q-Mix send. So inside my audio I/O, I've designated the output for the phones to be a Q-Mix. Now at this point, that means the Q-Mix is accessing the DSP mixer inside the Studio 192 mobile, and there'll be no latency for our headphones. This is ideal for tracking. Now you can engage that or disengage that by clicking the Z. You can also set whether the controls for the send are following the track controls. In this case, our level control is not locked, but if we turn on the lock icon, when we move the level here, it'll move the level for our send as well, and the same thing for the pan. When we unlock that, we can access those independently of the channel controls. We can also access the microphone preamp controls from here. We can turn phantom power on and off, we can invert the polarity, and we can control the trim level. We can also access the DSP fat channel that's running inside the Studio 192 mobile from right here inside Studio One. So if we click on this, we'll see that it opens up, and we can double click to open that all the way up. Now the purple at the top indicating onboard DSP means that this processing is running inside the Studio 192 mobile and that our tracking won't have any latency hit because of that. So we can access all the parameters for that input processing right here. We can choose, using this setting here, whether our DSP processing is being applied to the tracks that are being recorded or if they're just being monitored. So if we turn that off, we'll hear the changes that we make with our EQ, our compressor, and so on, but it won't be recorded to our track. If we turn that on, the changes we make to the fat channel processing will also be recorded into our track permanently. So once we've made settings that we like, let's for example say we're going to record an acoustic guitar and these settings are going to work for us. We'll close that. We can choose not to record that, only to monitor it, but now we can drag this down as an insert running inside the computer, and now during playback, we'll get the exact same settings going on here inside the playback using the Fat Channel plugin in Studio One. Now, one of the really cool things is that the system is smart enough to recognize when you punch in your recording, and it'll switch between the two types of processing. So when we engage recording with a punch in, it'll use the processing running inside the interface on the input, so there's no latency hit. But then when we punch out and we're just listening to playback, it'll automatically switch back to using the plugin that's running inside of Studio One. It's a very slick system that's easy to use and lets you have the best of both worlds, both that latency-free DSP processing as well as processing that's inside the DAW. If you're not using Studio One, you can still remote control the preamp functions using Midi from your DAW. For example, I have a Pro Tools session running here on my MacBook, and because we're connected by USB, Midi will be transmitted between the interface and the computer. This allows us to control the preamp gain as well as 48-volt phantom power on and off. To give you an example of what I mean, I've created a Midi track here. We'll switch over here. Now by setting automation, I can actually set the preamp level. And in fact, you can record changes from the front panel of the Studio 192 Mobile right into Pro Tools. So let's set that up to record. Then we can play back those changes later. So if we need to make changes for certain sections of a song, you can actually automate those using your DAW. Your final option for remote controlling the Studio 192 Mobile is with the iPad UC app. It gives you all the same functionality as the computer-based app. I hope you've enjoyed this look at the Studio 192 Mobile audio interface from PreSonus. It's a compact, portable audio interface, 2 microphone preamps, 26 inputs, 32 outputs, lots and lots of functionality here with that DSP-based mixing, effects, and processing, all controllable from your DAW or using the UC app. Thanks for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute. I'm Mitch Gallagher.